So I have this text document of sort of game design thoughts, not ideas for games, but just sort of things I've learned from other games, and general ideas as well. And I recently wrote in it, challenge is good actually, because I've previously had a slightly conflicted relationship with challenging games. I've often said that it's not important to me, or that it's much less important than it is for most people. And I certainly don't. My sort of how much I want to be challenged is way lower than other people. For them, not everyone, but the sort of the average gamer, and by that I mean like the people traditionally thought of as gamers, like the people who are like, I just beat Call of Duty. That element of like needing to beat something and wanting to be presented with a challenge to overcome, that is not part of the appeal of games for me. But obviously, I realised it wasn't literally true that I don't need any challenge at all to a game. But I generally feel like it's fine to just make the game easy. Basically, I play a lot of games on easy because I'm often not that interested in like getting good at the combat. I just want to, I want the aesthetic experience, or I want to explore the upgrade tree, or I want to do cool stealth things. That's the main thing I get out of games. And stealth is actually weirdly, like, in a non-stealth game, the difficulty rarely affects stealth actually. It's, whether you get spotted or not is often pretty clear cut. In Dishonored is different because it's a dedicated stealth game, and those tend to have like the difficulty options relate to the stealth. But yeah, I'm starting to see the virtue of it for various reasons. So the thing that's changed in my thinking on it is that now I think there should always be. I want to make games where there is always more to be accomplished. Like getting through it perfectly should almost be an impossible concept. Because I've learned that challenge pushes you to discover what's interesting about the game. It feels like challenge wakes the game up. And the reason I haven't discovered that before now, and the reason it hasn't been true before now, for a lot of games that's not true. You give me Super Meat Boy, the fact that it's really, really hard doesn't help me at all. It doesn't cause me to learn anything interesting about the game. It just makes me frustrated, and I want to quit. I don't get better at the game. I would get better at the game much faster if it was easier, because then I could ramp in gently and I could learn things bit by bit. But when you just hit me with a brick wall, I don't learn anything, I don't benefit from it, I don't get anything out of it. But what I have the games that have kind of made challenge work for me are mostly roguelikes, where they are super difficult in the sort of technical sense of like, you're unlikely to complete it, you're unlikely to win, you will probably fail, but they don't feel like failing. Playing Spelunky, I don't think of myself as having like 4,000 Spelunky failures and 25 Spelunky wins. That's what the game says I've done, but or deaths and wins they call it. But they don't feel like failures. They feel like I played the game this much this time, and that's when my session ended. And that's very different to like dying on a level in Call of Duty like 8 times and just not being able to get past it because you just got to keep redoing the same fucking level. So roguelikes have basically made failure more fun because it doesn't involve repetition. When you fail, you don't have to repeat yourself. You get to have a new experience next time. And so that has meant that I've spent more of my gaming time close to the brink of failure, being challenged at the limit of or slightly beyond my capabilities, and not being frustrated with it usually because I don't feel like I'm being set back when I die. And so that's a really good thing. And it's brought to the surface like one particular thing. So challenge like wakes the game up, and challenge pushes you to discover the things that are interesting about the game, as long as it's applied in a way that's acceptable to the player in question. In my case, that has to be done in a way where dying doesn't feel frustrating, or failure doesn't feel frustrating, because actually failure doesn't have to mean dying. And the more I play games, the more I think you should just never be able to die in them. Like even Heat Signature, which is like a permadeath game about the sort of finite lives. You live a life and it's supposed to end and you start a new one. You're supposed to live many, many lives. Even that throughout its development, we kept taking out ways you could die. Like, there were so many ways you could just be killed early on, and each one we would just end up having to remove because it would, when people hit it, if they didn't feel it was fair, or if it was unexpected, or if anything about the game was remotely unclear, it went from being like an annoying experience to like, I'm fucking done with this fucking game, fuck this forever. It was, the frustration spike was just, unacceptable. And obviously there's kinds of games that thrive on that kind of frustration, but that's not what I wanted to make, and it's not what I'm interested in playing. So we just took it out. We're just like, if you get shot aboard a ship, obviously, so the first frustration alleviating mechanic that was in there very early was if you get shot, then you don't die, we instead get thrown into space and you catch yourself. If there's only one guy on the ship and you shot him as he shot you, then there's no one to throw you out. That used to lead to you just dying. You just lost the character. And I thought, I saw some people being upset about that. I thought, well, tough, you shot the guy, it's your fault. But then there can also be like pathfinding or AI, not pathfinding, but AI glitches that mean they don't come and pick you up when you think they might, or they feasibly could. And in order to remove all of those without also introducing a bunch of other weird cases, we would have had to make AI literally perfect, which is never a good thing to have on your mandatory list of features if you ever want to finish a game. And so it ended up like, I just saw a couple of very persuasive cases where people had lost a character due to the AI not picking them up when it really they kind of should have. And so just decided, okay, if the AI doesn't pick you up, you just stand up. Gunshot's gone now, I'm fine. And so we took that out as well. And then the last remaining way you could die on board a ship was if you shot a fuel barrel, because if you're actually in the room when it's destroyed in a blast that's powerful enough to rip a chunk out of a spaceship, then that instantly kills you. And then that also led to a bunch of frustrating, unexplained deaths. It happened so fast that you couldn't tell what had happened, so we added a delay, so when you shoot a fuel barrel, it leaks flame for a while, then it blows up. People do not spot that quickly enough to understand what's happening a lot of the time, and so again it could become an unexplained death, and because it's the most severe penalty you can endure, it felt like bullshit, and so even that doesn't kill you now, it just throws you into space, because catching yourself in space is fun. That's a cool moment. You know something went wrong, you get the chance to go back to the ship and see, oh, that room's gone now, I wonder what happened there. You have a better chance for learning experience. And we lost nothing in any of this. All of those deaths we took out, it took away nothing from the game. There might be some player out there that would have enjoyed that version more, but for me it was never a negative. There was nothing lost at all. And so you have to ask yourself, like, well, what are the last ways that you can die in the game? What are they there for? It's really, I would like to make a game where it's just like cushion after cushion after cushion. Everything you fail, you get shot, so you get thrown out. Then you've got to catch yourself. Fail to catch yourself, something else happens that then gives you another chance to get back. And I'm playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey at the moment, and I'm playing on easy, by the way, and I've still died like 3 times. And every death is not just a negative experience, but an actual, feels like a failing of the game. I've never felt like I died because I did something stupid, or because it's always just been like, where the fuck did that come from? Why the hell am I dead? Like, why didn't you dodge when I told you to dodge? Why didn't you block when I told you to block? Why did that hit count even though I was out of range? It's always bullshit, like 100%. And I had that same thought about Just Cause last time I played a Just Cause game, which would have been Just Cause 3, I guess. Just like, why am I ever dead in this game? What do you gain from me actually dying? Like, if I fuck up and I get shot a lot, there are ways to make that an unviable strategy. Like, if I'm playing the game wrong, then prevent me from succeeding, but you don't need to actually kill me and set me back to a checkpoint to make that happen. So yeah, I think challenge can be more interesting than just like, do this perfectly or die and repeat it until you do it perfectly. In fact, I would go so far as to say that's garbage, and I will probably never make a game where that's the operative mechanic, unless it's something like Gunpoint, where you can you're going back like 3 seconds, so it's more about fine tuning your solution rather than having to repeat anything. And the heat signature daily challenge has really brought this into focus as well, because heat signature has always been permadeath, but it matters a lot more in the daily challenge because, and it's not so much that this character matters more, because in fact it's a much more temporary character than you usually have, but there's two parts of it. One is the mission matters more. This is like a if you fail this mission, it's over. This mission's over, and the other missions that in the daily you won't get to. Whereas even on your personal mission in Heat Signature, that's not true. You can fail as long as you don't kill someone you're supposed to capture, or rescue someone then let them die in space. Then you can retry the personal mission. Like if you just lost the opportunity, you can still go out and get it again. You don't even have to pay again, I think, if I recall correctly. And so the daily challenge is totally different, because just fucking this one thing up, it's all over. And so you really think about it a lot more than you normally would, and you think about your purchasing choices a lot more, because the price counts against your score, and if you buy anything at all, it means you're not getting a perfect score, so you really have to want that thing and be sure you're going to need it. And it pushes you to discover interesting new tactics. It makes the game more interesting to have that kind of pressure. And when you do fail, hopefully it's not super frustrating. I mean, it definitely means we've definitely seen a big uptick in people suddenly have a lot more questions about, oh wait, does this thing penetrate the shield? Or when this thing happens and that thing happens, does that count as this? Those kinds of questions, which have always been relevant in Heat Signature, have often been mission critical. We didn't get a lot of questions about them. Now we're getting that all the time, because if you fail daily because of it, the stakes are much higher. So that probably is more frustrating than failing a regular mission. And obviously, if we could fix all of those, if we could make everything about the game immediately intuitive, we would. But it's the sheer volume of information you have to get across is absurd, and short of just filling the screen with text that almost no one's going to read, it's impossible to really make a game that's 100% clear to everyone all the time when it's as complex as this, when there's as many different things that can interact with each other as they do. So the best you can aim for is make it as consistent as possible and let people learn through mistakes. And yeah, some of those mistakes will be annoying, but I don't really know of a perfect way to do that. And we do things like, it's a pause and play game, so you have as much time as you like to stop and look at what's happening and mouse over people and read the descriptions. And in fact, 90% of the questions we get are things that are answered in the missions listing thing. Like, we tell you, what happens if you crash a defender, and how glitch-proof hull works, and all this stuff is all the bare facts of the rules are in there, and people don't read them. So I don't think we're failing to explain that stuff too much. But yeah, the daily challenge pushes you to discover interesting tactics. It pushes you to be more careful and to improvise more, I think. I've definitely had a lot more cases where I am figuring out how to use just a normal ass gun and a hammer, and figure out how to use those to get past something that I would normally think you can't get past. And that kind of brings me to a concept that I sort of started to see in FTL a long time ago, and has come up a few times since, usually in the best games, in my favourite games at least. Games with lots and lots of options, like immersive sims and to some extent FTL and Spelunky, and I guess there's a difference actually. Games like Deus Ex give you a lot of tools, and the world is richly systemic and things can interact in interesting ways. A game like Spelunky doesn't give you a lot of tools right off the bat. There are a good amount of tools you can possibly find, but you usually won't get them all in a given run. You usually just have, you can only carry one thing. You can replace your weapon, but you can't have multiple weapons. And then there's just bombs and ropes and a couple of other permanent passive things. So in Spelunky, it's not so much about the number of tools you have; it's about how things interact and figuring out ways to use those things. And particularly enemies interacting with each other. I think this thing spitting, so it hits that guy and he bounces into this, and then it triggers that trap. Enemies setting each other off, and that interacting with physics is kind of where the interesting stuff in Spelunky comes from, I think. Anyway, the concept, sorry, that was a rambly intro to it. The concept is Desperation Innovation. And I thought of it that way when I was in a situation in FTL where it just looked like I was completely dead in the next couple of seconds, and I was paused and sitting there thinking about it, as I now do often in Heat Signature. And only because I had no other options did I think about what turned out to be the solution, which was turning off my shields in order to let the enemy hit whatever they want on my ship. Because what they're hitting me with is an EMP blast. If it hits my shields, it turns off my shields, and the next thing they're going to hit me with will destroy my ship. So if I turn off my shields now, the EMP blast might not hit the shields. They might be aiming for the shields, in which case I'm fucked either way. But if they're aiming at anything else, even my weapons, like even the most important other thing, then my shields will still be online will still be, functional when the next hit comes, so I can just put them back up, and then that'll block the next hit and survive. And that's exactly what happened. They actually hit my life support with EMP. And that's an idea that, like, if you weren't on the brink of death, you would never think to turn your shields off, and just take a hit. It was only because there was no other options, and so my desperation led to innovation. I've had that situation to varying degrees in other games too. Like, it's a lot of the actually, I have had this in Slay the Spire. I wouldn't say Slay the Spire is that good at generating, actually, because Slay the Spire, what Slay the Spire is good at is a failure spectrum. So you have a really nice big range of states between perfect success and total failure, and so you actually don't spend a lot of time at the total failure end. You spend a lot of time thinking about like, oh, how can I do this perfect? Sorry, my camera ran out of space. So Slay the Spire doesn't often leave you at the brink of absolute failure, but it does often leave you in a situation where you're very much trying to do better than it looks like you can do. You're trying to find a way, like, is there any way I can do this without taking damage? Is there any way I can do this, like, I guess that's the top tier. Is there any way to do this, oh yeah, and level up my ritual dagger, which is like a thing that's not very good right now, but if I use it and it finishes a guy off, it gains permanent damage boost that will just last for the rest of the run. So it's good at doing stuff like that, and that counts actually. If you can, it's about desperation, it's not necessarily about absolute failure. So if you can make the player care enough about the next level of success that seems initially unattainable, then they will search their options to find these interesting possibilities. And I definitely think heat signature has an element of this. Like, when it goes well, like at its best, it's quite common in heat signature for me to be pausing when something's gone wrong and then just thinking, okay, is there any way that I can deal with a guy with a shield right now? And the new contractors actually in the new update are kind of, I hope that they increase those moments. Like, it's hard to be, the old heat signature was kind of like, here's what you're going to face, and in the shop here are some tools that can counter it, or you can go out in the world and look for tools that can counter it, and once you have those tools, you do counter those things, and it's fine, you can just take them out. And contractors are kind of, there isn't really anything, there are a few items, but like most loadouts in the game, when you look at a contractor, you're not thinking, yeah, no problem. It's always going to, okay, I'm going to have to think about this a bit. And that was intentional, and that kind of, and they're also very situational, they're very positional, they're very spatial, they roam the whole ship, so they kind of change the strategic landscape and the kind of shape of the challenge. Like, any given sector that you're looking at, right now it's a matter of getting past these 5 guards without alerting them, but if you spend more than 15 seconds on that, the tracker's going to be coming. And at that point, even if you slip by them, you're going to be opening the door into a tracker who's going to win in a straight-out firefight, so you've got to figure out a way around that. Or you can do it, but now there's a predator in the next sector. And so it's not a problem right now, you'll get to the next sector, but you better have a plan for what you can do about the predator. And that's kind of changing all the time. And obviously jammers, block off a whole area that means you can't use your gadgets in it, and that's going to change your plan as well. And that's kind of dynamically changing across the whole ship. And that feels like a missing piece of the puzzle. That the game just got a lot more interesting after that, and a lot more varied in terms of the moment to moment, like how one ship differs from the next, and how this sector of this ship differs from the next sector of this ship. It just got a lot more interesting, a lot more significant differences there. and a lot more cool situations where you are trying to figure out how the hell do I do this now. And so, like, creating a wide possibility space is pretty easy. Then creating situations that that push the player to explore it. Creating situations where it's necessary to come up with a clever plan to get past it is the next step of that, and that's also not too hard in itself. But the hard part is, how do you do that, in a way that the player has time to come up with a strategy? So the pausing was a critical part of that. That was not in Heat Signature for like 2 years. And B, so that if they can't think of anything, or if there just isn't anything in this one particular situation, it's not the worst thing in the world. That's probably the trickiest part. Like, how do you make it not frustrating when there isn't a solution? Because if almost by definition, not by definition, but in most cases, these kinds of desperate situations with a wide tool set they're emergent. They're a product of what has happened so far in this particular run of this particular game with this particular loadout. And that means as a designer, you can't really guarantee there is a solution. And so you kind of have to have a bit of, you have to have an answer for what happens if there isn't one. If they're just in this situation, there is no way for you to do what it is you're trying to do. And so if what you're trying to do is use your ritual dagger to get the last hit in on a certain enemy in Slay the Spire so that it levels up, when you discover there's just no way to do that and survive the fight, then it's fine, because not doing that is not massively frustrating. It's like, oh, it would have been nice if I could have done that, but I can't, so I'll just finish the fight normally. When it's like you're going to lose your character permanently, that's obviously a very steep price to pay, and you can't really afford to mess around with that. And that's why in Heat Signature, that isn't the failure case in most. Like, when you're sitting there thinking, how the hell do I deal with a shield guy when I wasn't expecting a shield guy, or I've just got to my target, but the defender's got close to him now, so he's got like an uncrashable shield, and I can't get. I don't know, how the hell do I get to the defender? How do I get rid of that shield? How do I get around that shield? Or how do I make it so it's not an issue? Or get him out of range of the shield? If you're in that situation and you just can't, there just isn't a way. I mean, there usually is, but in the worst case scenario, you don't lose your character then. In 99.9% of situations, you probably, in many situations, you're not even going to take damage. You're just going to say, oh, I just can't do this mission, I guess. Let's get out of the ship before I die. And I actually like that. I really enjoy missions where like I realise, oh, I can't do this. Let's see if I can survive. Even if you get captured, even if you had this countdown going to like when you're going to be captured, and you still took the risk and you went for the objective and you fucked it up and you've got no clever way out of it and you're going to be captured, that's still not the end of that character. You can still rescue them with another character. And so, yeah, that's why the failure point at those moments is not loss of character permanently. It's, oh, this mission's over. And usually in Heat Signature, that mission is not a huge deal, except when it's your personal mission, which, as I say, in a lot of cases you can retry it if you fuck it up. Depends on whether you actually killed the person you're here to capture or rescue. And on the daily challenge, which is new. So the daily challenge is better at pushing you to find those interesting solutions, but the downside is you do have more to lose, and so anything that you don't end up finding a clever solution, or you try something and it doesn't work the way you think it did, those moments can be more frustrating. I don't know what the conclusion of all this is. Just that, I mean, the old thing about failure spectrums is truer than ever. It's, you need a good range of outcomes between total success and total failure. But I especially want to be pushing people to try and move one step up on that. I think it gets interesting when it looks like outcome A is not possible, and outcome B, yeah, you can see a way to do that, but outcome A is better, and you're like trying to think, oh, is there any way I can do that? That's fun, and especially I've chosen A and B as like best and second best, and I think that's an interesting area that like I say, Slay the Spire explores it. It explores it. It doesn't totally like I think I'm waiting for a game to come out and like completely prove that that's where interesting, fun stuff can live. Into the Breach is an interesting counterpoint here because it actually doesn't have a huge failure spectrum, really. It's like, because yeah, you can talk about not taking mech damage, but actually there's no penalty for taking mech damage. It's only if you're going to literally lose a mech that it matters at all, or you've been asked specifically to avoid a certain amount of mech damage. But it's quite binary, partly because they establish like getting the secondary objectives is super important. If you miss even one in the whole campaign, you lose a huge bonus that would be really useful, and that to me just feels like campaign failure. I would rather just give up and start a new campaign at that point. Because it's only going to get worse from there. Now you don't have the advantage that you're going to need more than ever because you fucked up, and that doesn't work out well. So it doesn't have, but it does. What it does do a good job of is you're really trying to find a way to avoid grid damage. You're really trying to figure out, is there any way I can not take a building hit? And it's also good that when you do take grid damage, it's not game over, and it might not even be grid damage. It might be resisted. So it's got a good cushion, but it doesn't have a lot of extra stuff to aim for. There isn't. It's just get those option objectives, and you just have to, in my opinion. And if I can do that, there's nothing further for me to aim for. I just do that, and I can do that. So great. There's no further push. There's no further There's no further push for me to come up with clever things. And again, Into the Breach, I love it, and I find it extremely addictive and compulsive, and like lovely to play and interact with, and really fun. But actually, I haven't had as many emergent moments in it as I've had about the same as I have with like XCOM 2. So it's not like more emergent than that. And I'm about to make an indie scale tactics game like that. And I want mine to be more emergent than XCOM. I want mine to have more sort of Deus Ex-y moments or moments like Heat Signature generates, where you figure out a weird way to use your tools to succeed. I would say like Heat Signature has more of those moments than Hotline Miami. I would like Tactical Breach Wizards to have more of those moments than XCOM. Whatever the reference point is in the genre, figuring out like those methods is what I'm interested in. And it turns out to be quite easy to create the basis for that, to create the tool set for it, create abilities that can be combined in interesting ways. And so then the last piece of the puzzle is just how do you push people to use them, and how do you ensure that being unable to use them, in the rare case that you can't do it, or that the player doesn't think of it, that the failure is not too frustrating.